possession at the death of his father." "So I had understood," said the attorney. "I have heard Mr. Mainwaring himself speak of them." "And," continued the other, "only a few days before sailing for America, I called at their chambers in London and told them of Hugh's intentions regarding my son, and received their congratulations. Now, sir, do you mean to tell me, in the face of all this, that Barton & Barton are retained by this mushroom claimant, whoever he is? Pooh! Preposterous!" Mr. Whitney shook his head slowly. "Mr. Sutherland is not the man to make any misstatements or allow himself to be misinformed. All I have to say is, if those attorneys are retained in the case, it certainly looks as though our opponent must have some tenable ground in support of his claim. I am inclined to think they will make us a hard fight, but I am confident that we will win in the end. The main point is this: we must be prepared to meet them on whatever ground they may take, and after hearing their side and the proof they set up, we can easily determine our line of defense." "To the deuce with your line of defense! I tell you, Whitney, there is just one point to be maintained, and by my soul, it shall be maintained at any cost." And the speaker emphasized his words by bringing his clinched hand down upon a table beside him with terrific force. "That the point is this: Harold Scott Mainwaring never had a living, lawful son. No such person exists or has ever existed on the face of the earth, and I can prove what I say." "Have you absolute proof of that?" Mr. Whitney inquired quickly. "I have," replied Ralph Mainwaring triumphantly, while his cold, calculating gray eyes glittered like burnished steel. "If any man thinks I have been asleep for the past 21 years, he is deucedly mistaken. Mr. Whitney, since the day of that boy's birth," pointing to his son, "I have had but one fixed resolve, which has been paramount to everything else, to which everything else has had to subserve. The Mainwaring estate, with its millions, should one day be his. Not a day has passed in which this was not uppermost in my mind, not a day in which I have not scanned the horizon in every direction to detect the least shadow likely to intervene between me and the attainment of the dearest object of my life. When the news of Harold Mainwaring's death reached England, in order to guard against the possibility of a claim ever being asserted in that direction, I set myself at once to the task of finding for a certainty whether or not he had left any issue. I never rested day or night until, after infinite labor and pains, I had secured the certificate of the attendant physician to the effect that the only child of Harold Mainwaring died within an hour from its birth." "Have you that certificate now?" inquired the attorney. "Not here. It is among my private papers at home." "Cable for it at once. With the death of Harold Mainwaring's child fully established, the will would cut no figure, one way or another." "That will," said Ralph Mainwaring fiercely, turning upon Mr. Whitney with an expression which the latter had never seen, "let me tell you, will cut no figure one way or another in any event. That will, remember, is a forgery, and if necessary I will prove it so, if it takes my last shilling and the last drop of my heart's blood to do it. Do you understand?" The attorney understood, and was more than ever convinced in his own mind that the old will filed that day was genuine. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Mrs. LaGrange sat alone in her apartments, awaiting the coming of Richard Hobson. It was considerably past the hour which he had set, and daylight was slowly merging into dusk, yet enough light still remained to show the changes which the last few weeks had wrought in her face. Her features looked pinched and drawn, and a strange pallor had replaced the rich coloring of the olive skin, while her dark eyes, cold and brilliant as ever, had the look of some wild creature suddenly brought to bay. She shuddered now as, from her window, she saw the cringing form of Hobson approaching the window. "To think," she exclaimed to herself passionately, that creature is the only one to whom I can go for counsel or advice. I loathe the very sight of him. Fool that I was ever to place myself within his power. I thought I could use him as a tool like the rest, but it is like playing with edged tools. Yet I dare not let him go." A moment later she heard a stealthy, cat-like tread in the corridor outside, followed by a low, peculiar tap at the door, and Hobson entered. She crossed the room slowly, keeping her face in the shadow, and motioning him to a chair, seated herself opposite, watching him narrowly. "You are late," she said coldly, in response to his greeting. "Admitted, my lady," he replied in his usual unctuous tones, "but I naturally wish to ascertain all the facts possible regarding this new deal, and seeing Whitney nosing about on the trail, I decided to remain within earshot and pick up what information I could second hand." What did you learn?" "Nothing very definite, and yet enough, perhaps, to give us our clue until further developments. My dear lady, what do you think of this new turn of affairs?" "The whole thing is simply preposterous, a piece of the most consummate audacity I ever dreamed of." "Ha! I thought it would strike you as particularly nervy. It is the most daring bit of invention I have seen for some time, and it must be a pretty cleverly concocted scheme, and pretty well backed with the ducats also, for I learned to night that the heir," laying special emphasis on the word, "has secured the services of Barton & Barton, and those birds are too old to be caught with chaff. Besides, you know as well as I the part that firm has taken in the Mainwaring affairs." "Barton & Barton! Incredible! The case is hopeless then for Ralph Mainwaring. He is a fool if he expects to win." "Just what I was leading up to. Whitney is no match even for this man Sutherland, and he will be a mere child in the hands of the Bartons. Now, the question is, where do we come in? As you say, Ralph Mainwaring's case is hopeless, unless," and he looked significantly at his client. "I do not think I quite catch the drift of your meaning," she answered slowly. "Has it not occurred to you that there are not two people in existence who can so quickly tear to shreds the scheme of this impostor as you and I? There is not a human being living outside of myself who knows the real facts concerning that will, and who could give such effective and convincing testimony regarding Harold Mainwaring's son as yourself." "Admitting all this, what do you propose?" "When Ralph Mainwaring has staked his highest card and finds that the game is irrevocably lost, what will he not give at the last critical moment for assistance such as we can then furnish him?" "And which course would you pursue in that event?" she asked, a tinge of irony in her tone. "Would you deny that such a will ever existed in face of whatever evidence may be brought forward in its support, or would you admit being party to the destruction of the will?" "My dear madam, I am perfectly capable of conducting this affair to our mutual satisfaction, and without running my head into any trap as you so pleasantly suggest. And right here allow me to say that it would be just as well for you not to make those insinuations which you are so fond of throwing out at random. As I said before, no living person outside of myself, including even yourself, knows the facts regarding that will. You have your own surmises, but they are only surmises, and you had best keep them to yourself. As you know enough of me by this time to know it will be to your interest to accept my suggestions and fall in line with my plans." Her face was in the shadow, and he did not see the scornful curl of her lip or her peculiar expression as she remarked coldly, "You are only wasting words and time in your efforts to intimidate me. You have not yet made any suggestions or outlined any plans. I have asked you what you propose to do." "I have not time to go into the details, but briefly stated I propose, when the right opportunity presents itself, to prove, first, that this document filed today is a forgery. If I can show conclusively that the original will was accidentally lost or intentionally destroyed, or if I happen to have the original in my possession, under any of these conditions I gain my first point. Then, through your testimony, I shall demonstrate unequivocally a still more important point, that this so-called heir is a gross impostor, that no such individual exists." "And for this you expect what?" "For this I shall demand a handsome remuneration, to be divided, of course, between yourself and myself, and Ralph Mainwaring will only too gladly give the half of his kingdom for such services." "And your testimony would have so much weight with Ralph Mainwaring and the Bartons, and with everyone else who has any knowledge of your London history?" Hobson winced visibly, but before he could reply, she continued, "You are talking the most arrant foolishness. You know that those men would not allow your testimony in court. They would very quickly procure evidence to show that your word, even under oath, is worthless, that you are a liar, a perjurer, and a—" "Not so fast, my lady. If past histories are to be raked up, I know of one which embraces a much wider area than London alone, Melbourne, for instance, and Paris and Vienna, to say nothing of more recent events." "Do your worst, and I will do mine," she replied defiantly. "That is nothing to the point, however. What I have to say is this. You are a fool if you think that you or I can ever extort money from Ralph Mainwaring. He would give no credence whatever to anything that you might say, and if once my identity were revealed to him, he would go through fire and blood rather than that 1 shilling of his should ever become mine." "And what do you propose to do?" he asked sullenly. "Do you intend to give up the game?" "Give up? Never. I would give my life first. I will yet have my revenge on the Mainwarings, one and all, and I will repay them double for all the insult and ignominy they have heaped upon me." "That is to the point, but how will you accomplish it?"